A judge asked a disabled veteran to stand in court. What happened next stopped the room cold. Clarence Duvall didn't ask for pity. That's never been his way. All he ever wanted was to be left with a little peace and maybe enough space to breathe. But that Tuesday morning in a Ramsey County courthouse in St. Paul, Minnesota, the air felt tight, like the room itself didn't want him there. The wheels of his motorized chair squeaked as he rolled toward the double oak doors of courtroom 3B. His daughter, Talia, a quiet but steady presence in her father's life, walked beside him, clutching a manila folder filled with medical records and an old discharge paper from 2004. Her eyes scanned every face they passed, maybe checking for judgment, maybe just trying to stay calm. Clarence wore the only suit he owned. It didn't fit the way it used to. The left sleeve bunched near the elbow where his arm had shrunk from years of disuse. His legs, stiff and hollow beneath him, hadn't taken weight in almost 2 decades. Still, his chin stayed level. He wasn't here to grovel. He was here to face something he didn't believe he deserved, but knew he couldn't ignore. The charge? Technically, a probation violation. He had failed to report a change of address when his last apartment building got sold, and tenants were forced to move within 30 days. There wasn't malice in it. Clarence didn't even have the energy to be reckless anymore. It was just life. Rent gets hiked. You pack what you can. You go where they'll take you. But the system doesn't leave room for just life. Miss a check-in, miss a form. Suddenly, you're a number in a courtroom again. As the bailiff called out his name, Clarence took a deep breath. "Ready?" Talia whispered. He nodded. "Let's handle it." Inside, the courtroom buzzed in that dry, stale way government buildings always seem to hum. Rows of hard benches filled with quiet defendants and tired lawyers. At the front, behind a wide, polished bench, sat Judge Ellen Marbury. Mid-50s, sharp glasses, silver-streaked hair pulled into a perfect twist, known for being fair but cold. Her courtroom didn't allow phones, hats, or excuses. She was the kind of judge who read every line of a file, but sometimes forgot there was a person behind it. Clarence guided his chair forward as Talia held the folder close. When the judge saw them, her eyes flicked down at her monitor, back up, then down again. Her expression didn't shift. The public defender assigned to Clarence, a wiry young man named Ben Rosner, stood beside him. He barely made eye contact, probably juggling 3 other cases in his head. "Mr. Duvall," Judge Marbury began, her voice sharp and clipped. "You've been brought here today for failure to report a change of residence. You were on probation as part of your 2007 deferred judgment agreement. Do you understand the charge?" Clarence kept his voice level. "Yes, ma'am." "And do you understand the consequences if this violation is confirmed?" "Yes, ma'am." She tapped a few keys on her terminal. "Then we'll proceed to sentencing." The room stiffened a little. Clarence blinked. "That fast?" Talia opened her mouth, but the judge raised a hand without looking. "This isn't a hearing. This is sentencing. He waived that last month." Clarence's voice cracked just slightly. "I didn't know I waived anything." Judge Marbury glanced down at the screen again, brows knit. "Your signature's on the form." Clarence looked to Ben, who suddenly found something fascinating about the floor. Talia shook her head gently, gripping her father's hand. He squeezed hers back. The judge exhaled. "Fine. Then as part of court protocol, Mr. Duvall, please rise for the reading of your sentence." The words dropped like a weight in the room. Clarence's body didn't move. He looked up at the judge. "Your Honor, I haven't stood since Fallujah." But the judge didn't answer right away, and for the first time since Clarence rolled in, the courtroom fell completely still. There are stories that don't make it into the court file, things that don't fit in neat boxes marked military service or disability status, things like pain, things like guilt, and things like the quiet pride that keeps a man like Clarence Duvall from ever asking for more than he's earned. He didn't like talking about Iraq, not because of what he saw, but because of what he couldn't unsee. Fallujah had taken his legs. A roadside bomb tore through the side of the convoy truck while Clarence was hauling wounded civilians out of a crossfire zone. He remembered fire, heat, screaming, then silence. For months after, he'd wake up sweating, reaching for limbs that weren't there anymore. The VA gave him a chair and a timeline. "You'll probably be in this for life." That's what they said, but Clarence was stubborn. He refused to let the chair define him. He coached youth football for a few seasons, volunteered at the VFW, raised Talia mostly on his own after his wife passed away in 2011. His life didn't move fast, but it moved forward, and that was enough, until his apartment was sold and rent doubled overnight. Clarence had no choice but to move in with his cousin 2 cities over, just 30 miles away, but apparently far enough to violate a probation clause from nearly 20 years ago. He'd been put on probation in 2007 after being caught driving with expired insurance and a suspended license. The result of a missed VA appointment and a faulty DMV flag. No drugs, no violence, just a mess of red tape. He'd forgotten about it, honestly, until the letter came, and then the summons. And now this. Back in the courtroom, Judge Marbury hadn't moved. Her eyes searched Clarence's face like she was trying to measure truth from tone. But protocol pulled harder than empathy. "Mr. Duvall, I respect your service," she said slowly, "but I am required to follow court procedure. Unless there is a certified medical exemption." Talia didn't wait for her to finish. She stepped forward, holding up the manila folder. "We have the records. His doctor submitted them twice already. We even emailed the clerk's office." The judge's eyes narrowed. She looked toward the clerk. "Did we receive any documentation for this?" The clerk scrolled through a screen, lips pressed tight. "It looks like it was sent, but not attached to the file. Must have been lost in the system." Clarence let out a dry, quiet chuckle. "Ain't that something?" Judge Marbury's lips thinned. "Even so, the file as it stands requires a formal standing procedure." Then Clarence did something unexpected. He nodded once, then turned slowly to reach for something beside his chair. A cane. Talia stepped in. "Daddy, no, you don't have to." "It's all right," he said, not looking at her. There was an ache in his voice. Not of pain, but of something deeper. Like this was something he needed to do, not for the judge, not for the system, but for himself. "I've been practicing," Clarence said softly. "Couple of weeks now. Figured it might come to this." The room was still. Even the judge leaned forward, unsure what she was watching. Clarence set the cane in place. His fingers trembled, his shoulders tensed. And then, inch by inch, he pushed against the armrests of his chair. His breath caught, his left knee buckled. Talia moved forward, ready to stop him, but he waved her back. "Let me try." And right there, in a courtroom that never once paused for anyone, time seemed to freeze. As an old soldier fought gravity, shame, and 20 years of hurt just to stand tall one more time. Judge Ellen Marbury had presided over more than 2,000 cases in the last 10 years. She'd seen liars, addicts, thieves, and the occasional story that could break a person's spirit if they let it. But she didn't. That was her rule. Feel less, judge better. You start soft in this work, you don't last long. She didn't hate people like Clarence Duvall. Truth be told, she didn't feel much of anything toward most of the folks who came through her courtroom. Her job wasn't to care. It was to interpret, apply, move on. That was the only way to survive it without becoming bitter or burnt out. But now, as she watched Clarence try to stand, really try, not for sympathy, but with purpose, something in her chest pulled, tight, like someone was pushing a thumb against a spot she'd spent years ignoring. She hadn't planned on asking him to stand. It was just a line she read in every case. Automatic, scripted. She hadn't even looked twice at the disability note on the screen. If it was there. It probably wasn't. Not that she'd admit that. Clarence was halfway up. His legs wobbled under him like tree branches caught in a wind. One of the veterans in the back row, a man wearing a jacket from the 3rd Infantry Division, rose slightly from the bench. Another man near him, African-American, mid-70s, whispered, "That's Fallujah Duvall. Damn!" Talia reached toward her dad again, but he shook his head firmly. "Just give me a second," he said, teeth clenched. And then slowly, like watching a miracle that didn't come from church, Clarence stood. His cane barely held, his body trembled. But he stood. A quiet gasp moved through the room. One of the public defenders lowered his head, blinking hard. The court clerk stared, her hands paused mid-keystroke. Judge Marbury stood too. Not because of protocol, not even to match him, but because she didn't know what else to do. It felt wrong to stay sitting while this man, who hadn't been upright since he was blown out of a Humvee, was fighting to stay vertical just so she could read a sentence that should have never happened. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. Clarence's eyes met hers. "I'm not doing it for you," he replied. "I'm doing it for the men I lost, and the part of me I'm still trying to keep." And that hit her hard, because Ellen Marbury had a brother once. His name was Glenn. He never made it back from Ramadi. She didn't talk about that much, pushed it down, became a judge instead, let the law keep her steady. But now she wasn't steady. She wasn't anything close. She stepped down from the bench, slowly, carefully. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the judge, so often seen as cold and above it all, walked down to the defendant's level. When she reached Clarence, she stopped, then extended her hand. He didn't take it, not out of disrespect, but because he was using every ounce of strength just to keep standing. "Mr. Duvall," she said quietly, "I don't believe there's anything this court can say that would measure up to what you just showed." But before she could say anything else, Clarence's body shook, and suddenly, every eye in that courtroom was waiting to see what would happen next. Clarence's knees gave first, not all at once, just a slight buckle, like a bridge swaying under too much weight. Talia moved instantly, slipping her arm under his, embracing him with surprising strength. He winced, but didn't fall. Not yet. The judge was still close, closer than any judge had ever stood to him, and Clarence, though shaking, refused to sit. "I'm all right," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Daddy, please," Talia whispered, voice tight with fear. "You don't have to prove anything." He looked at her, and for a moment, something softened in his face. Then he looked back to the judge. "I just wanted you to see me as a man," he said. "Not a file, not a charge, not a mistake." Judge Marbury didn't move. She was still processing what was happening, still thinking like a judge when she probably needed to think like a person. The courtroom hadn't heard a sound in over a minute. No shuffling, no coughs, just a kind of silence that felt alive. One of the bailiffs finally stepped forward. "Your Honor, I can help him sit." But Clarence interrupted. "No disrespect. Let me." He adjusted his stance. You could see every muscle fighting back. His fingers gripped the cane like it might split in two, and with slow, deliberate effort, he took a step, just one. But in that single movement, the room changed. A woman in the back gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" And Judge Marbury, for the first time in her 10 years behind that bench, forgot what line came next in the script. Clarence smiled, just barely. "Took me 3 weeks to get that far," he said. "Was going to surprise my daughter on her birthday next month." Talia pressed her lips together. Her hand was still on his arm, ready to catch him. Judge Marbury cleared her throat, but the sharpness was gone. "Mr. Duvall, you've made your point. Please, sit down before you fall." Clarence didn't argue. He let out a shaky breath and eased back into his chair, the relief obvious in the slump of his shoulders. Talia helped guide the cane back into place. The judge looked down at her shoes for a moment, as if they might explain how to handle what had just happened. Then she turned toward the clerk's desk. "Can you confirm," she said, "that we did in fact receive documentation from Mr. Duvall's physician regarding mobility restrictions?" The clerk tapped nervously. "Yes, Your Honor. It looks like it came in 2 weeks ago. It's stamped received, but it wasn't filed properly." Judge Marbury's jaw flexed. That was her courtroom, her responsibility. "Understood. Thank you." Then she turned back to Clarence. "You shouldn't have had to stand today. That was a failure on our part." Clarence nodded. "Wasn't just today, but I get it." Marbury looked around the room. Her eyes scanned the benches filled with people waiting for their names to be called. Most of them didn't look like her. Some were young, some old. A few sleeping children rested against tired shoulders, lives wrapped in legal language that didn't tell you who they really were. She stepped forward again. "Mr. Duvall, your service record, your condition, and the court's oversight all factor into what I'm about to say. But none of those things matter more than the example you just set." Clarence didn't blink. "Your sentence is vacated," she said, slowly and clearly. "Effective immediately. No further appearances required. Your record will be flagged for discretionary review for full dismissal." Gasps. Not loud ones, but real. Clarence's mouth parted slightly, like he wasn't sure he heard her right. "You're dismissing it?" Talia asked, her voice shaky. The judge nodded. "I am." The bailiff raised an eyebrow. Even Ben, the public defender who had been mostly silent until now, looked up, stunned. Clarence didn't speak for a few seconds, then, "Thank you, ma'am." Marbury shook her head. "No, thank you." But just as the court started to settle, someone stood from the back, someone who hadn't moved since the beginning, and said something that made the room go silent again. The man in the back who had stood was tall, maybe late 60s, clean-shaven, and wearing a weathered Marine Corps cap. He stepped into the center aisle without waiting for permission, ignoring the subtle glance from the bailiff. "I served with him," he said. Clarence turned slowly in his chair. "Ray?" The man nodded. "Raymond Jeffers, 1st Battalion, Charlie Company." Clarence let out a breath. Not a laugh, not a cry, just breath. The kind you let go when you see a face that reminds you you're still tethered to something real. Raymond looked toward the judge. "He's not the kind of man you just let walk through your courtroom like he's another checkmark on your docket. He saved 6 people that day in Fallujah. I was one of them." Marbury didn't say anything. She just listened. Sometimes that's all a judge can do. Raymond walked closer. "They said he wouldn't survive the blast. Then they said he wouldn't speak again. Then they said he'd never move anything below his chest." He gestured toward Clarence. "He just took a step. You think that's about paperwork?" The courtroom was frozen. Raymond stepped beside Clarence's chair and rested a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't know he was still alive until today. Saw his name on the docket and came to make sure someone said what needed saying." Clarence looked up at him. "You should have brought beer," he said. A few chuckles broke the tension, just enough to breathe again. Raymond leaned closer. "You know, they gave me a medal for surviving, but they never gave you one for saving me." Clarence gave a small shrug. "I didn't do it for medals." "You did it because you don't know how to quit." Clarence nodded once. "That's about right." Talia looked between the two men like she was seeing her father in a completely new way. Her eyes were glassy, and she didn't bother to wipe the tear sliding down her cheek. Judge Marbury took a long breath, then turned to the gallery. "I don't usually allow unscheduled testimony in my courtroom, but I think we've all seen something today that speaks louder than any prepared statement." She looked back to Clarence. "Do you need help leaving the courthouse?" Clarence smirked. "No, ma'am. I came in under my own power. I'll leave the same way." As the hearing ended and court was dismissed, something strange happened. No one got up right away. People just sat there, unsure of what to do after witnessing something that didn't fit into the day they expected. But Clarence? He started to wheel himself toward the exit. Talia walked beside him, proud and quiet. Raymond followed close behind, stopping only to shake hands with the judge, who, for the first time anyone could remember, stepped off her bench and walked all the way to the door with them. The clerk wiped tears when she thought no one was looking. One of the young public defenders snapped a quick note on his pad that simply read, "Not all heroes wear suits." And Clarence, just outside those courtroom doors, paused. He looked over at his daughter. "You hungry?" She laughed. "Always." He pointed to the diner across the street. "Let's eat. You're buying." But just as they stepped outside into the afternoon light, neither of them knew that someone inside had drawn a sketch, that this moment would go far beyond that room. The sketch was done in pencil, light strokes, nothing dramatic. Just a courtroom, a man in a chair, and a judge standing beside him. The artist was a court intern named Rena Delgado. She wasn't supposed to be drawing. She did it anyway. It was instinct. She'd come to observe sentencing procedures for a criminal law class. She expected routine. Instead, she watched a man lift himself from a wheelchair and carry the weight of his past without complaint, and a judge who, for once, chose compassion over code. That night, Rena posted the sketch online with a short caption. "Today, I saw something no textbook ever taught me." She didn't name names, didn't tag anyone, but the image spread fast. By morning, it had 40,000 shares. By noon, 200,000. By nightfall, someone recognized Clarence. A fellow veteran commented, "That's Staff Sergeant Clarence Duvall. He saved my cousin in Fallujah." Then others chimed in. One by one, old names, old stories, men and women who hadn't spoken about the war in years, suddenly remembering the man in the chair who always stayed calm under fire. The story took on a life of its own. Local news picked it up first, then a few veteran advocacy pages, then national headlines. Not because it was flashy, not because it was political, but because something about Clarence felt real in a way people didn't expect anymore. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't trying to be anything. He just showed up, told the truth, took a step. In Ramsey County Courthouse, Judge Marbury sat in her chambers the next day and read every email that came in. Some thanked her, some criticized her for not knowing Clarence's condition ahead of time, but most simply said, "Thank you for listening." She hadn't realized how starved people were for sincerity, for a moment that felt unfiltered, human. Her clerk knocked on the door late in the afternoon. "He's outside." "Who?" "Mr. Duvall." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and stepped into the hallway. Clarence was there in the same chair, this time no folder, no lawyers, just him and a small coffee in his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She shook her head. "Not at all." "I wanted to thank you, properly." She hesitated. "I should be thanking you." He smiled. Funny how that works. They were quiet for a second. Then Clarence looked at her and said, "You probably don't remember this, but I saw your face when I stood up." "I remember," she said. "You looked like someone else was standing with me." The judge's throat tightened. "My brother," she whispered. Clarence nodded slowly. "Ramadi?" "Yeah." "I'm sorry," she exhaled. "Me too." Clarence looked down at the floor, then back up. "You know, I never cared much about what people think, but yesterday, I realized something." "What's that?" "Some moments are bigger than us. We don't get to decide who remembers them or why, but when they come, we gotta meet them the best way we can." Judge Marbury nodded. But before Clarence left, he turned and added something neither of them would forget. Clarence paused before turning to leave. The hallway was quiet, just the soft hum of vending machines down the corridor and the occasional shuffle of footsteps from another floor. He looked at Judge Marbury, then spoke with a calm steadiness, like he'd been thinking about this for a while. "You know, yesterday, when you asked me to stand, I didn't feel insulted. I didn't feel humiliated. What I felt was seen." She blinked. "Seen?" He nodded. "Most folks just look past me, or through me. Chairs make people uncomfortable. Disabilities make them talk softer, like I'm fragile. But for 1 second, even if you didn't mean it that way, it felt like someone expected more from me, like I wasn't invisible." Marbury didn't know what to say to that, not right away. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Clarence cut in gently. "But maybe it was what I needed, not because of the court, but because of me. I've been living small for a long time. Yesterday made me remember I'm still here." The judge stepped back slightly, folding her arms. "Mr. Duvall, Clarence, you reminded me of something too, that there's a person under every case number. And sometimes the law gets in the way of justice. I let that happen." Clarence shook his head. "You corrected it. That's what matters." They stood in silence for another moment, just breathing the same air, no titles, no robes, just people. Then he offered her his hand, not out of formality, not because he had to, but because it felt like the right ending to something that had started out broken. She took it, shook it firmly. "I hope this courtroom never forgets what happened," she said. Clarence grinned. "That makes two of us." As he turned to roll down the hall, Talia appeared from the elevator, her phone buzzing in her hand. "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Somebody started a fundraiser for veterans with mobility issues. Your name's all over it. They're sharing that sketch everywhere." He raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" "Dead serious. One guy even said you should run for office." He laughed for real that time. Lord help us all if that happens. They headed out together, into the world that now seemed to be watching them. But Clarence didn't feel pressure. He felt light, like something heavy had finally shifted off his shoulders. Judge Marbury returned to her chambers, but her routine felt different, slower. She stared at her docket. Names she didn't know, faces she hadn't met yet. And for once, she didn't just see charges. She saw lives. Later that evening, Clarence sat at his cousin's kitchen table with a sandwich in one hand and a newspaper in the other. The sketch was on the front page of the local section. Right beneath it, a headline, "One step at a time, a veteran's stand moves a courtroom." He folded the paper and looked at Talia, who was scrolling through her phone. "You think this'll fade?" She looked up. "Eventually, people move on fast." "Good," he said. "Then maybe the next person like me can get a fair shot without needing a miracle." But as he said it, The phone buzzed again, this time from a national news outlet asking for an interview, and Clarence realized the story was no longer his alone. By the end of the week, Clarence Duvall had 3 interview requests from national networks, a personal message from a U.S. senator, and more emails than he could count. His cousin's house became a revolving door of reporters, veterans, community organizers, and a few people who just wanted to shake his hand. But Clarence didn't chase the spotlight. He wasn't interested in being anyone's hero. He made that clear the first time a camera was turned on him. I stood up because I could, he told them. Not because I wanted fame, not for headlines. That moment wasn't about attention. It was about reminding myself I'm still standing. That's it. Still, something about the honesty of it all stuck with people. Talia helped him set up a fund for wounded veterans who'd been lost in the system, guys who never got that second chance. The donations poured in faster than they expected. What started as a sketch had turned into nearly $150,000 in support within a month. Judge Marbury sent a private letter, no official court seal, just her handwriting. She thanked him again, not for what he did in the courtroom, but for what he awakened in her. I don't know if I've ever truly seen the people who stood in front of me each day, she wrote, but now I do. You changed more than your own sentence, Mr. Duvall. You changed me. Clarence kept the letter in his wallet. Sometimes, at night, he would take it out and read it again, not for pride, but for proof that some moments actually matter. He started visiting local high schools to talk with kids about what it meant to serve, not just in uniform, but in life. To show up when it's hard. To take one step, even when it hurts. He always ended with the same line, I don't stand easy, but I stand when it counts. And that's what people remembered. A few months later, the judge spoke at a conference on sentencing reform. She mentioned Clarence's name once, but it wasn't the story that mattered to her anymore. It was the lesson. There is no justice without recognition, she told the crowd. Not of facts, of people. Clarence watched the speech from his cousin's couch, a blanket over his knees, and a hot mug of tea in his hand. That's you she's talking about, Talia said, smiling. He looked at the screen and smiled back. No, he said quietly. That's everyone who ever got overlooked and kept going anyway. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves blew across the driveway. The world, as always, kept turning. But somewhere in that movement, Clarence Duvall had shifted something too. He didn't need anyone to remember his name. He just hoped they'd remember what he stood for. Because sometimes, the smallest act, one step, one voice, one honest moment, is enough to remind the world what dignity really looks like. Everyone has battles the system doesn't see. But when we stop treating people like problems and start seeing them as human beings, something powerful happens. Justice becomes more than punishment. It becomes healing. If Clarence's story moved you, take a moment to reach out to a veteran, support someone going through the legal system, or donate to organizations that fight for fairness and access. One step at a time, we can make a difference.